The lower Elwha tribe is gathering to celebrate their first day of fishing on a free-flowing Elwha in over 100 years.
341. Hold that number, because before Washington took the concrete out of the Elwha, biologists in wetsuits swam that river face down through glacier water for 4 straight seasons.
It's a rainy morning in October, and over 10 years have passed since dams were removed from Washington's Elwha River.
Counting every wild summer steelhead they could find. 4 years, all that water, they found three fish, and scientists quietly wrote the runoff is gone. There was no breeding program waiting, no secret stock, no plan to bring it back. Then the dams came down, and within 4 years, 3 fish became 341. Nobody put them there. Something had been hiding in this river for 100 years. Before the concrete, the Elwha was never an ordinary river. It ran 40-some miles from the Olympic Mountains to the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and along that length, it did something almost no other river in the lower 48 could. It carried every kind of Pacific salmon and sea-run trout native to the region. 10 stocks. Spring Chinook, summer and fall Chinook, coho, chum, pink, sockeye, summer steelhead, winter steelhead, bull trout, and cutthroat. 1 watershed. And its Chinook were legend. This river grew king salmon that hit 99 pounds, the size of a grown man, muscling up through a rock gorge locals called the Goblin's Gate. In 1790, a Spanish explorer named Manuel Quimper wrote that he bought 100-pound salmon from the indigenous people at the mouth of this river. For the lower Elwha tribe, the river was not scenery. It was everything: food, ceremony, identity, all of it moving with the fish. Here is what made it extraordinary. Most of the watershed sits inside what is now Olympic National Park. Cold, wild, protected, the high country salmon need and almost never get. Nearly all of it in near-perfect condition. And biologists later estimated 400,000 adult salmon and steelhead surged back into this river every year to spawn. 400,000, normal for thousands of years. The only thing that would ever stand between those fish and the finest spawning grounds on the Olympic Peninsula was 2 walls of concrete, and a man was already looking at the canyon. The wall. To understand how a fish comes back from functional extinction, go back to the man who built the wall, because the illegal shortcut he took is the exact reason this river had any bloodline left to rebuild from. He had no idea. His name was Thomas Aldwell, and he looked at the Elwha and saw one thing: electricity. A canyon he could plug to power the Port Angeles mills. So he bought land along the river, partnered with a Canadian financier named George Glines, and in 1910 started building the Elwha Dam 5 miles up from the sea. There was a problem. Washington had passed a law in 1890 requiring every dam to include a way for fish to get past it. A fish ladder, on the books, 20 years old. Aldwell ignored it. He built no passage at all. He cut a second corner too, never anchoring the dam's base to the bedrock underneath. Nature caught that one before the courts did. In 1912, as the reservoir filled behind the unfinished dam, the bottom blew out. Water and debris tore downstream. Aldwell found new funding, rebuilt, and by 1913, the dam stood complete. No way through for a single salmon. Not everyone stayed quiet. A Clallam County game warden named James Pike saw where this was going. In 1911, with the dam still going up, Pike wrote the state fish commissioner. Thousands of salmon were piling up below the concrete with nowhere to go. Nobody with the power to act listened. 14 years later, they did it again. In 1927, a second taller barrier, the Glines Canyon Dam, rose 8 miles upstream. 2 walls now. Above them, more than 90% of the Elwha's spawning habitat went dark. A century dark. What that did here is worth saying plainly. 90% of the habitat gone. The fish that depended on it fell an estimated 98%. 400,000 a year, crushed into a fraction, crowded into the last few miles below the lower dam. The summer steelhead took it worst. Rare, prized fish that come in during the warm months and hold for months before spawning. And to survive that wait, they need cold water up high. The dams cut them off from exactly that. By the time modern scientists were counting, wild summer steelhead here were functionally extinct. But the river was hiding something, and hold on to this detail because it becomes everything later. When the Glines, Canyon Dam trapped the upper watershed. It did not just trap water, it trapped fish. Rainbow trout, stranded above the concrete, generation after generation for 100 years. And a rainbow trout and a summer steelhead are the same species, the same fish. The only difference is a steelhead goes to the ocean and a rainbow trout stays home. Those landlocked trout carried the full genetic blueprint of their sea-run ancestors, filed away, unused, waiting on a door welded shut since 1927. That door stayed closed a century. The tribe watched their river empty out. The 99-pound Chinook faded into old photographs and older stories. And the dams, by then owned by a paper company called Crown Zellerbach, kept making a trickle of power, aging, cracking, holding an ecosystem hostage. If rivers coming back from the dead is the kind of story you want more of, take 2 seconds and subscribe. We chase these comebacks all over the country, the rivers and forests and species everyone wrote off. Because somebody was about to look at those 2 walls and decide they were coming down. And that fight is where this story almost died for good. The long fight. By the 1970s, the lower Elwha Klallam tribe had already spent decades pushing to take the dams out, and they were no longer alone. In 1974, a landmark court ruling affirmed the treaty fishing rights of Washington tribes, and the legal weight started to shift. Conservation groups came in. Fisheries biologists made the case that fixing this river did not mean bolting fish ladders onto the concrete. Studies showed that even with modern passage, leaving the dam standing would never bring the salmon back the way full removal could, because the best spawning gravel sat far upstream, in cold water only a free river could reach. In 1992, the fight reached Washington, D.C. Congress passed the Elwha River Ecosystem and Fisheries Restoration Act, and President George H.W. Bush signed it into law. The goal was in black and white: take out both dams, bring back the salmon, and then it crawled. One senator worked to block the money while another fought to push it through. The timber industry pushed back. Some locals were scared for their power bills and their property. It took the federal government until the year 2000 to actually buy the dams, and another 4 years of negotiating with the tribe, the National Park Service, and the city of Port Angeles before a final plan was locked down. Building the dams took a few short years. Deciding to take them out took most of a human lifetime. Frances Charles, chairwoman of the lower Elwha Klallam tribe, later put words to that patience, thanking the tribal members who kept telling each other year after year not to give up and to stay the course. That patience had one more test coming, because it turned out that taking a dam down safely is far harder than anyone who built one ever bothered to worry about. Unbuilding a wall. On September 15, 2011, it started. And it did not happen in one dramatic instant, no matter how the story gets told. This was a careful, staged demolition that stretched across 3 full years. Crews worked off barges, chipping and cutting the concrete down in controlled layers. And yes, at the tougher structure, engineers used precisely placed blasting to break the taller Glines Canyon Dam apart section by section. Notch a piece, let the river drop, let it settle, notch again. Less an explosion than unbuilding a wall, one course at a time, with the river doing half the work. The reason for all that caution was buried behind the dams, literally. Nearly 100 years of sediment had piled up in the 2 reservoirs, around 30 million tons of it, sand, gravel, silt, and rock that a healthy river carries to the sea a little at a time. Let all of that go at once and you bury the exact habitat you are trying to save. So, the removal was paced to let the river move roughly 20 million tons of it downstream on something closer to its own terms. Even paced, it was ugly. The water ran thick and brown for months. Turbidity, the measure of how much muck is hanging in the flow, spiked to levels many times higher than even a major flood had ever produced. In the short term, a lot of the fish and insects left in the lower river simply could not breathe through it, and they died. That was the cost. The middle chapter, the hopeful headlines, skip. The whole project ran about $351 million, making it the largest dam removal in history and the second largest ecosystem restoration the National Park Service had ever attempted, behind only the Everglades. By August of 2014, the last of the Glines Canyon Dam was gone. For the first time in 100 years, the Elwha ran free from the mountains to the sea, which left the only question that actually mattered. After a century behind a wall, Would anything out there still remember the way home? The river remembers. They remembered almost immediately. Sam Brinkman, the chief fisheries biologist for Olympic National Park, and his teams had braced for a slow, cautious return. Nature did not wait. Within months, salmon were nosing past the old dam sites into water their kind had not touched since before the First World War. In the summer of 2012, Chinook started pushing upstream. Steelhead and coho followed them into the tributaries, feeling their way into creeks no fish of their line had ever seen. Within roughly 2.5 years of the first dam coming out, biologists had documented 8 different sea-run species back above the barriers: Chinook, coho, sockeye, pink, chum, winter steelhead, summer steelhead, and Pacific lamprey, plus bull trout moving freely again. The numbers climb from there. Trout surveys that found around 3,000 fish in 2007 were counting more than 25,000 by 2019. More than 4,000 Chinook had returned by 2022. Some populations jumped by well over 200%, and the river itself grew. All that sediment did more than pass through. Much of it settled at the mouth and built new land. Roughly 70 acres of fresh estuary, where shellfish, birds, and young fish could shelter. Near the mouth, the seafloor rose by around 33 feet as the delta rebuilt, reversing decades of erosion that had been eating the shoreline. The comeback climbed right up out of the water and onto the land. As the old reservoirs drained, crews put something like 195,000 young plants into the bare ground, coaxing forest back onto what had been lake bed. And the animals moved in on their own. Trail cameras across the former reservoirs caught deer, elk, black bears, cougars, bobcats, coyotes, and beavers, all walking back onto ground that had been underwater for the better part of a century. Nobody had to invite them. They just came. Then came the moment the tribe had waited a century for. In the fall of 2023, the lower Elwha Klallam tribe opened a small ceremonial and subsistence fishery for coho, the first time in over 100 years that tribal members legally fished their own river after the dams. It was tiny and deliberate, a few hundred coho out of a run of several thousand. They took 177 that first year and 189 the next, small by design. A careful reawakening, not a harvest. A natural resources technician named Vanessa Castle pulled 2 coho from the water that opening day and said it filled her spirit to fish just as her ancestors had fought for. Loretta Charles, the tribe's oldest living member at 91, remembered her father catching salmon in this river as big as she was. 100 years of waiting, answered by a few hundred fish and a ceremony. But the return that stopped scientists cold was the one nobody had counted on. The impossible return. Remember the summer steelhead, the run that was functionally extinct. Remember the 3 lonely fish counted across 4 years of surveys. In 2016, 2 years after the upper dam came down, researchers started seeing summer steelhead in the upper river again. Not a handful. By 2018, a snorkel team counting one stretch of the Elwha tallied 341 wild summer steelhead, where there had recently been almost none. A run declared functionally gone had put itself back together in the span of a few seasons. 3 fish, then 341, and only 4 years of open water between them. So, where did they come from? You cannot rebuild a run from 3 fish. Biologists ran the genetics. And the answer is the reason this whole story earns the word impossible. Those new sea-run steelhead trace back to the rainbow trout. The same landlocked rainbow trout that had been trapped above the Glines Canyon Dam for 100 years. Cut off from the ocean for a full century, those trout had never stopped carrying the instructions to become steelhead. The moment the dam came out and the ocean was reachable again, some of their offspring did what their ancestors had always done. They went to sea and they came back transformed. Nobody stocked them. Nobody trucked them in from anywhere. Nobody bred them in a hatchery and released them and hoped. The run rebuilt itself the second the water let it. Sit with what that means. An entire way of life survived 100 years of imprisonment with no chance to be expressed, no ocean to practice on, no ancestor left alive that had ever made the trip. Folded up inside a fish that looked to anybody watching like it belonged in a mountain stream. The wall that erased the summer steelhead from the lower river is the same wall that accidentally saved their blueprint in the upper one. biologists assumed a wiped-out run would have to be rebuilt by hand, fish by fish, over generations, decades of work and money and hope. Instead, the river rebuilt it for them, for free, out of raw material everyone in the water had already swum right past. And the nutrients came back too, in ways that reached way past the water. When scientists tested the blood of small river birds called American dippers, birds whose families had not seen a salmon run in a century, they found the chemical fingerprint of the ocean inside them. Marine nutrients carried inland in the bodies of returning salmon were already moving back through the food web. This river was not just refilling with fish, it was rewiring everything, from the gravel on the streambed to the birds standing on the banks. The ocean was moving back inland, one salmon body at a time, and other rivers were watching. What comes next? For years, the Elwha stood as the largest dam removal ever attempted. A real-world experiment plenty of people expected to fail. It did not fail. It became the blueprint, the thing you point at when somebody tells you it cannot be done. When the country took on an even bigger job, tearing out a series of dams on the Klamath River along the Oregon and California border, the Elwha was the proof sitting behind it. Salmon simply need the door left open. On the Klamath, within a single year of the major dams coming down, Chinook were already spawning in stretches they had been locked out of for generations. The scientists who study the Elwha add one caution, and it matters. This is not finished. Full recovery, the point where these runs reach anything like their historic size, is measured in decades. The official targets are not expected to be met until at least the early 2030s, and realistically longer. A river does not heal on our schedule. It heals on its own, and it does not care whether we are still watching when it finishes. Which brings us back to Thomas Aldwell, standing over his canyon, breaking the law by refusing to build one fish ladder. He thought he was burying this river's salmon for good, trading 10 ancient runs for a little electricity. For a century, he was almost right. But the same concrete that strangled the summer steelhead in the lower river is the exact structure that trapped their bloodline safe in the upper one and held it there, intact, until the day the wall came down and the ocean called them back. The dam meant to end this river's story is the reason it got a second one. Today the Elwha runs free from the Olympic Mountains to the sea, carrying salmon, sediment, and a warning worth keeping. As one biologist put it, national park boundaries do not protect rivers. People do. So here's what I want from you. Subscribe, because we are following every one of these comebacks. And then tell me down in the comments, if a run written off as extinct can hide inside a fish for 100 years and come back the moment we get out of its way, which river should we free next? Name it, and go watch the next recovery waiting on your screen right now.